We are in the midst of a series entitled Alive, Living Wholeheartedly, or How to Live Life Wholeheartedly. And as we've worked through that, we've talked about the self aspect of living life wholeheartedly, knowing who we are before God and who God's created us to be. We're on the tail end of the surrender part today. And we're going to look at probably one of the most significant aspects of surrender. And then next week we'll move into simplicity and finally in structure. But as we look at today's message, we're looking at this idea of trusting when we don't understand. And I want to talk about a concept called the wall. I've defined it a little bit in your worship guide. This won't come up on the screen, so if you'd open it up and look on the back of your notes, I want to clearly define this. This is a concept that's been around in Christianity, been written about by Christian forefathers for a long time, but it's really been neglected and overlooked in modern Western Christianity. We like a Christianity that says, God's there to make my life as smooth and easy as possible. But that's a very modern Western concept. It's not true in historical Christianity. And today we want to talk about what some have called it modern-wise, or that we're doing in some of our studies, called the wall. Now, I know that sounds maybe like a TV reality series, right? Can't you just hear it? Coming up tonight, The Wall, season premiere. Critics are raving about its reviews. Watch Christians, hundreds of Christians, fall like flies off the wall as they attempt to navigate it, right? 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central Time. It's not a reality TV show, but it is very real. And it's a stage, it's a season, it's a journey that any faithful Christian will eventually come up to. It usually doesn't happen early on. You might have little experiences or trials or tests, but a wall is a greater test, a greater trial, so to speak, in which God does a significant work in your life. And I want to prepare you. Maybe you've never been through one. Maybe you have. Many people have already, and they had no idea what it was, or they're still wandering, trying to regather from it because they can't put it together in modern-day Christianity. I want to teach you from the Scriptures and from a historical view of this, of why it's so important to know this. Even if you haven't faced it, to prepare that, hey, it's going to come, and it's a good thing. You don't have to be afraid of it. You don't have to be scared of it, but be ready so that when you face it, you know how to walk through that wall. And that's what today's message is going to talk about. How can you survive? How can you navigate? How can you thrive through a wall that God will bring into each of our lives if we choose to follow him? Let me define it for you real quick, and this is in your worship guide. A wall, I define it like this: a significant period of testing not due to specific sin. Okay, that's very important. Circle that even in there. It's not due to specific sin, but intended to deepen love for God and trust in his sovereign goodness. Okay, here's some characteristics, some general characteristics. And these will look different in everyone's life because God's purifying each one of us personally around our own struggles and issues. But one of the characteristics is a loss of things that are significant to you in this world. During a wall, you will experience a loss of some things significant to you. It might be your health. It might be your position. It might be your pride. It could be something very tangible like your possessions, and it could be something very personal or inward like your reputation. But you will lose something that's obviously of great significance to you in this world to teach you some things. The second thing is you'll experience a perceived silence or absence of God. Perceived silence or absence of God. A third thing is an absence of clear reasons for why this is happening. An absence of clear reasons. And finally, periods of self-doubt, discouragement, and deep questioning concerning your faith. That gives you a little bit of a framework of what a wall looks like. Now, note, as I think I put this in your notes as well, it's different than God's disciplining due to a specific sin. Meaning, if you're having or if you're doing some kind of corrupt business practices under the table, and you know it's wrong, and all of a sudden you have a great, huge crisis you face in your business, don't say, oh, this is a wall, man. God's just bringing this upon me to purify me. No, this is discipline. When there's something specific that you're doing wrong, God lovingly disciplines his children to bring them back. If you're going through a period of sexual impurity in your life and you're not living the way God wants you to live in that area, God will bring about loving discipline in your life to correct that. That's not a wall, that's discipline. Are you with me on that? Okay, a wall is different than that. It's not due to any specific sin. It's just a period or a time of testing. It's also different than a trial aimed at building a particular area of our faith. Say Abraham and Isaac. Unfortunately, that's one of the areas the author of the book we're looking at used as a wall, but it's really not a wall. Abraham and Isaac is a trial. It's a test. Would he hold Isaac up as an idol, this child that finally came, or would he release and trust him to God? He was focusing on a very specific area of Abraham's life and his faith. It was not so much a wall. What we're going to see in Job's life today is the epitome of a wall. In fact, the book of Job is put in the Bible, one of the longest books in the Bible, to teach us this, but it's a book that's been greatly neglected. We sing about it. We love that song. But often we don't ever stop to think, do we really believe it? That, Lord, you give and you take away. But my heart will choose to say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Job is a profound and poetic book. In fact, it's what we would call an epic poem, which is a form of literature, a poem that's based on actual fact. But it's written in a poetic way. Okay, so you don't read it as if it's a narrative story like some of the Old Testament, like every little detail is exactly what was happened, but it's a poetic way of teaching some very specific truths and factual events that happen. Like chapter 3, when Job has this whole long soliloquy that he spews out. He probably didn't just say that in the midst of it, right at that moment. It didn't just come out of his mouth. It's a written poem to express how he was feeling, what he was going through in those times, based on truth. It's the only book like it in the Bible. And it's broken down into 3 big sections. We're only going to look at the first one, but I'm going to talk through aspects of the whole book as we go through it. In the book of Job, you see 3 movements in this poem, or this almost like a play, you could even say it is. The first is a conversation between God and Satan. Okay, first movement, God and Satan. We're going to see that today. The second movement, which is the largest part of the book, the whole middle section, probably about 34 chapters, 35 chapters, is conversations between Job and several of his friends. And you're going to learn when you have friends like his, who needs enemies. Okay, but you're going to see in each of his friends exactly how we often treat others in the midst of their trials. And God's going to teach us differently. And then the last movement is a conversation between God and Job. A conversation, mind you, where God never gives Job the answers that he wants. But he does teach him exactly what he needs. That's the book of Job in a nutshell. What I want you to see today is 3 things. First is I want to show you 2 perspectives you must embrace in order to navigate the walls in your life. 2 perspectives you must embrace. Difficult perspectives, but biblical perspectives that if you will embrace them, will help you navigate the wall. And the third is a person that you must remember. 2 perspectives you must embrace, and a person you must remember. If you have your Bibles with you, open them up to the book of Job, chapter 1. We're going to walk through that passage, read through it together. The page number for that is on the back of your worship guide, page 417. If you grab one of the Bibles in the chair in front of you, that'll take you right there. Job is an Old Testament book, right in the wisdom books. It's near Psalms and Proverbs, some of those books in the middle. If you hit Psalms and Proverbs and turn to the left, you'll hit Job. It's not Job, so if you're looking for a job, this book isn't going to help you. But Obama could stand to read it anyways, probably. That was a bad one. Ba-doom, boom, tsh. Where's our sound effects this morning? Job, let's read. The first part of this gives us a picture of who Job is, its background. And then we start into the story or the conversation in verse 6. So it says, there was a man in the land of Uz, not Oz, this isn't Dorothy, but Uz, whose name was Job. And the man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. So look at his character. This is a blameless man, an upright man, one who trusted God or loved God. That's what feared often meant in the Old Testament. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one of it on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. What do you see about this character of Job? You see his stellar character, right? You see the type of person that he is before God. And with that, you see the tremendous blessings, the things that God has brought into his life, okay? That's important. It sets up the scene that we see next. It says in verse 6, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord." Now the sons of God is an expression often used in the Old Testament to refer to the angels, okay? So just say angels when you see that. That's what it usually refers to. Came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Satan, if you know his history, was one of the highest created angels in God's created order, and at some point went through a rebellion against God. He wanted to be the center of all things and be above God, and so he rebelled against God, his own creator, and with him he took a third of the angels with him that we call demons. Okay, these are real beings that once were holy beings and now they're evil beings. So he was there present as well. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Now notice the poetic nature. God obviously knew where he came from. He knows everything, but it's poetic. "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? I mean, have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in all the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So God says, you have freedom to do whatever you want to his stuff, his possessions, but do not touch him personally. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and the daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job, and he said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you." And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it fell upon the young people, and they are all dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshiped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God. 2 perspectives, 1 person. That's what I want to show you from this passage. The first perspective we must embrace to survive a period or a season or a wall in our lives is that I must accept that I won't have all the answers. The first perspective I need to embrace is to accept that I won't have all the answers. You see this whole story, and as you go through it, Job's going to ask some penetrating questions that we're going to look at through this book, and he's never going to get answers to them. At any time, God does not reveal to him. We see this. We have this writing now. We see a little bit behind the scenes what happened. Job never understood this. He didn't even have what you and I have today to better understand why these seasons come. Let me just show you some of the questions that Job had as he went through it. I'll put them up here. I don't think they're on your notes, but you could jot down the references if you want. One of the things Job asks is, what have I done wrong? He says that in chapter 6, verse 24. That's one of them. Next one. Why won't you forgive me? Okay, this isn't God saying that he won't. This is just the questions, the things that Job wrestled with in the midst of this season. Next one. No matter what I do, nothing changes. You never said anything like that, have you? Okay. Third thing. Why won't you answer me? There's that perceived silence or absence of God. Next one. I can't take any more of this. Nobody cares about me. Why can't it be the way it was? What good is it to serve God? Have you ever said anything like that? You ever experienced seasons in your life where words like that have come out of your mouth? You understand one thing, that the greatest of Christians have struggled with the problem of suffering and will continue to do so. Nothing answers it more profoundly and more wisely than the Bible itself. But it doesn't mean they're easy answers. This is an area where we as finite creatures must learn to trust God even when we don't understand it, even when we don't have all the answers. As we do that, here's two things that we need to understand in learning to accept that I won't have the answers. One is this: reject simplistic answers. Reject simplistic answers. Here's the two most common, and there's several others, but here's the two most common that I see in our society where we're at. The first is the religious answer. The religious answer says this: it's all about you. Okay? And if you just do the right things, if you were living right, if you were doing all the stuff you're supposed to be doing, then God will bless you. And in fact, I've heard this just the other day when something seemed good happen in my life and someone said, man, you must be living right. You ever say that? Man, they must be living right. When you say that, this is the way you're perceiving the world. God wants us to reject simplistic answers. Because you know what happens when we live by this mindset, by this mode of living? Then when we find ourselves in the midst of a wall, do you know what we try to do? We try to pray more. We try to confess more. We try to do more at church. We do for one reason: to get God to change my circumstances. That's the religious answer. That's how we often judge one another when we see others going through a trial. Now understand, there are times when people are going through trials because of a specific sin. And in those situations, as Christians, we are to speak into their lives. But when that's not clear, then maybe it's something else. The whole middle section of the book of Job is this answer. Every one of his friends, his three friends that came to him, one of them didn't say this, but three of them did. This is the answer they brought to him. Job, if you just confess the sin, what are you hiding? What are you refraining to tell God? Because God would never bring this into your life if you hadn't done something wrong. They had accepted a simplistic answer, and God confronts every single one of them in the end of the book, telling them they were wrong. Reject simplistic answers. The first is the religious answer. The second is the cynical answer. The cynical answer is what the world often gets to, or maybe we as Christians, as we get to a point where we're just frustrated, we just say, you know, it doesn't matter what you do. Life's a crapshoot. You can be good, and God will do good things, and you can be good, and you end up with cancer and die at a young age. You can be bad, and it seems like God just prospers you, and you can be bad, and bad things happen. You know, how do you put it all together? It just doesn't matter. There's no meaning. There's no purpose in it. So just do whatever you want to do. That's the other simplistic answer. That's the cynical answer. If we're going to navigate the wall properly, we need to learn to reject these simplistic answers. The second thing we need to do to reject simplistic answers is accept that God is sovereign. Accept that God is sovereign. Sovereign is a big, fancy theological term that just means he's in control of all things. He oversees all things. He doesn't necessarily initiate or cause all things, but he's in control of all things. That's a tension you need to learn to live with. It's in the scriptures. God does not cause the evil that comes in our lives, but he does allow it, and he's sovereignly in control over it. We're going to see that in this statement. In fact, the book of Job shows us that God wasn't directly responsible for Job's suffering, but that he was sovereign in permitting it. This is a truth that the Bible teaches us that we don't like as Christians. The Bible teaches that God has an asymmetric relationship to evil. Now you're going, wait a minute, what did you just say? Asymmetric, okay? That's the old math term, remember? What you learned in math, remember what symmetry? Y'all know what symmetry is, right? When everything's the same on one side as it is on the other side. That's nice and symmetric. Most of the people in the world, most of the religions in the world embrace a symmetric view of good and evil. Eastern religions say what? The yin and the yang, right? Notice they're both equal in the little diagram. Good and evil, they're symmetric. The Bible does not. Christianity is one of the only faiths that teaches an asymmetric view. It is not the devil versus God, and we're wondering how things are going to end up. It is God overall, and the devil is underneath him. The devil is actually God's tool to accomplishing some of the things he's going to accomplish in our lives. It's asymmetric. God created Satan. He created him as a holy angel. He is under him. He is significantly less in power, but in his rebellion, he's become an evil force trying to oppose God, and now God simply uses him as a tool to continue to accomplish his deeds in this fallen world. We may not like that. Many of you don't like it. There's aspects of it I don't like. But that's what God says. And I've come to realize in my own life that as a finite, fallen, sinful human being, I may not be able to understand everything about God. But some of the things I have come to understand is that he is so much bigger than me, that he is so much more powerful than me. He is so much more infinitely wise than me, that maybe I just won't get it all. And a wall teaches us that. See, this is troubling to us because we embrace a view that God lives for us rather than us for God. Hence, we buck at the notion that he would allow difficulty and suffering into our lives in order to bring glory and attention to us. Let's be honest with it, don't we? We buck at that notion because we want a God who lives for us. See, we have no problem. In fact, we love, we sing, we embrace, we worship. We love the fact that we have a God who would suffer for us. Don't we love that? Don't we worship that? Don't we symbolize it? Don't we wear it on jewelry? Don't we put it up in our house? We love the fact that we have a God who would suffer for us. We rejoice in it. We sing about it. More songs are sung of Christ on the cross than any other type of music we have. But yet, when the tables are turned and we're asked to suffer for God's glory rather than him suffer for our good, we buck at that. Doesn't that seem a little backward? If he's the most prominent, significant, powerful, amazing being in the universe, isn't he worth offering everything that we have just to know him? Accept that God is sovereign. You see, until you come to realize that God owes you nothing and he is free to give and take away anything at any time should he deem it best, all suffering will do, all wall will do, is strengthen your grip on the things of this world and make it more and more painful and really reveal in you where your true love is. This world and the things of this world rather than in him. Job acknowledges God's sovereignty in one of the most profound statements in the Bible. We read it today. We sang about it today. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb," meaning I had nothing, and I had no say in even the life I was given. He said, "Naked I came, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." If you never come to this point in your life, suffering will eat your lunch every time. See, if your mindset, like many of ours is, I've earned this stuff, I deserve this family, I've worked hard for this lifestyle that I have, I've done a lot to acquire the things and achieve the status and get the education that I have. If you have that mindset and that shapes your worldview, then every time you face a wall, it will absolutely eat your lunch. Because you've embraced a worldview, you've embraced an answer that simply is not true. That's the first perspective. Second perspective we must embrace after accepting that I won't have all the answers is that I must trust God's sovereignty is for my good. I must trust God's sovereignty is for my good. You see, the wall, as Job went through, is the only way to test whether we love God for who he is or simply for what he's given us. It's the only way that can be tested. It's the only way our heart can be proven true. See, true love can only be manifest when the only gain you have from that love is the person himself or herself. That's the only way, not some extra benefit. Otherwise, we fake love for the person simply to get what we truly want. Isn't that true? Don't we do that all the time? See, when Satan asked God in this conversation, he says, "Does Job fear God for nothing?" He was asking the most profound statement that could be asked. Does Job love you for nothing? Meaning for no other benefit than just for who you are, God? Does he really? He was questioning. He was challenging Job's love for God. And he says, come on, God. You've blessed him with this great family. He's got all this stuff. You've built this hedge around his life. Nothing ever bad happens to him. God, the only reason he loves you is because you've given him all this stuff. And so a wall needed to come. Not because Satan brought it up, but because it was best for Job to understand what and whom he loved the most. Have you ever experienced this in your life? A person who takes interest in you only because of what you can give them? Right? We've all experienced this, haven't we? I experienced it even as a pastor. People who take an interest in you and want to be around you, and as soon as you don't give them the influence that they want, that they really were in the relationship for, they just kind of drift away and they're no longer present and they're just gone. Why? Because they never really loved you for who you were. They loved you for some perceived benefit they might get for being friends with the pastor. Have you ever experienced this, women? How about those guys that hang around and they shower you with gifts and affection and all this stuff until you say you won't sleep with them, and then suddenly their number never seems to pick up. They're nowhere to be seen. Do you feel loved in those situations? No. Because we go after someone, we fake it. This is our natural human heart, is to seek people for what they can give us rather than for the person themselves. And a wall is God's loving, firm process to teach us how to love for love's sake, for the sake of that person, the way God loves us. I love how John Piper puts it in his book, Let the Nations Be Glad, when he talks about suffering or trials in our lives. He says, loss and suffering joyfully accepted for the kingdom of God shows the supremacy of God's glory more clearly in the world than all worship and prayer. Do you realize what he just said there? That loss and suffering, when we walk through these periods and we do it in a way that strengthens our grip on God instead of grasping harder on the things of this world, when we do that, it's more glorious, it's more glorifying of him than any worship service, any prayer service that we could ever hold. See, it's easy to come in here and sing songs and raise our hands and get all emotional about God. It's totally different when you got to go and live your life consistent with what you just got done singing. Nothing glorifies God more than your love being deepened for him, for who he is, as you walk through a period in your life when it seems like everything in this world is falling apart. God, we see in this book, this is an incredible truth, God used Satan to accomplish Job's good in his own glory. That's the end result. That's what happens in this book. Job glorified God in his response. And if you read the whole book, you see that. He recognized, you are more significant, you're more powerful, you're more mighty than anything I could possibly have. Blessed be your name, no matter what circumstance I find myself in. Don't you look at Job and go, wow. Millions of people over thousands of years have read Job's story and been encouraged. Why? Because Job's life glorified God, and Job's life made him a better man. God only allowed Satan enough freedom to accomplish God's own purpose. That's what you need to understand about God's sovereignty over Satan. He only allows him just enough freedom, in a sense, to hang himself. What Satan wanted to do was disprove Job. What ended up happening? Job was proven even further, and God was glorified even more. The very purpose of all humanity came about in God's sovereign power to allow Satan to do what he did. Last thing, two perspectives we must remember, but maybe the most important is a person we must remember. Remember who suffered innocently for me. Remember who suffered innocently for me. You see, several thousand years after Job's life, another truly innocent sufferer came along. And just like Job, this man was wrongly accused by Satan, and Satan was given permission to attempt to disprove his love and obedience and righteousness. But there's one difference. God did not tell Satan, in this man's case, do whatever you want, yet spare his life. God let Satan, in this man's life, go to whatever extreme, even to the point of death. You see, there's only one man who truly loved without false motives. There's only one man who, in his love, he stood absolutely nothing to gain. What could we possibly have given him that he didn't already have, except ourselves? Only one man who proved to be perfectly righteous in the midst of suffering. Jesus was that man. He's the only man to whom God said, obey me perfectly, and I'll crush you, I'll punish you, and you'll experience hell. The only man that God ever said that to. Think about it. Jesus experienced what you and I deserve. so that you and I can experience what he deserved. You'll never learn to love until you learn to walk through the wall well. You'll never learn to love until you learn to live without knowing all the answers. You'll never learn to love until you learn to trust that God's sovereignty over all things, good and bad in our lives, is for our good. And you'll never learn to love until you learn to remember the one person who suffered innocently for you and for me. You see, Job really deserved, in a lot of ways, because of his sin, because of our sin, because of our fallenness, difficulty. But Jesus never did. He willingly gave up all that was his. He gave up the glory and perfections of heaven to live on earth. He gave up his position and power and benefits in heaven to become a servant to you and me. And he did this knowing full well that he stood nothing to gain. 2,000 years ago, on a dark and tragic Friday night, one man learned to suffer well on a cross. 2,000 years ago, on a dark and tragic Friday night, one man learned to live not having all the answers. When he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" 2,000 years ago, on a tragic and dark night, one man learned to so trust the sovereign goodness of God that he was willing to experience something that had never been experienced from eternity past. Death and separation from his Father. And he did that because even though it was Friday at that moment, he knew that Sunday was coming. And he knew that through his death and through his resurrection, you and I would be able to face the walls in our life with a confidence we could never, ever have unless we saw someone walk through it perfectly, unless we saw someone experience what we deserved, knowing that God had not abandoned him, so that we could walk through it knowing that he had not abandoned us, but instead was using it to purify us and make us into the men and women he had called us to be. Jesus did this for us so that we could one day learn to live with all the answers, that we could one day learn to trust his sovereignty is for our good, that we could one day learn to love without any false motives. When you find yourself in a wall, and you will, remember who suffered innocently for you, so that when you're in the midst of that wall, you can rest assured that he will never leave you nor forsake you. Just imagine for a minute a church full of people who would rather love one another than network one another. Just imagine being in a church full of people who trust God's sovereign goodness even amidst significant trials and troubles. People who maintain an inner joy and hope because of their relationship with Jesus Christ, even in the midst of grieving and walking through incredible, difficult loss in their life. Imagine a church whose greatest testimony is not the worldly success they have achieved, but rather the deep satisfaction they have found in the person of Jesus Christ. Just imagine a church like that. You can become this church as you learn to embrace these things. Let's pray.